Photosynthesis continues to be a challenge for many students. Stay with me as we take this journey through the plant to see how it makes food. The main objective is to describe the process of photosynthesis in green plants. Today's task, as this would be lesson number 1 of a 3-part lesson. We want to find out what is photosynthesis, write the worded and chemical equation for photosynthesis, identify the parts of the equation, identify the site of photosynthesis in the cell, explain the process of photosynthesis, look at the fate of a product of photosynthesis. Let's hop right into the lesson. What is photosynthesis? This is a process in which plants, which are actually autotrophs, use simple inorganic material, carbon dioxide and water, to produce organic substance like glucose, carbohydrate, protein and fat. And of course, the plant uses the light energy from the sun to do this. Now, this light energy is captured by the chlorophyll, which is located in the chloroplast of a cell. And remember, the chloroplast is an organelle found in the plant cell. Now, this chloroplast is actually the site for photosynthesis in the plant cell. It's important to note that magnesium and nitrogen is needed for the process of photosynthesis, and the plant will be getting this from the soil. The common understanding of photosynthesis is that's the process by which plants make their own food, actually glucose using carbon dioxide and water, while chlorophyll captures the sunlight. But let us be reminded that we're studying for an exam, and so we want to stay in line with the request of the syllabus, hence the definition I gave earlier with simple inorganic substances. That's the one you need to know. The animation here summarizes what happens during photosynthesis. Look closely at your monitor. There is mineral coming from the soil. Now you're seeing mineral nitrate. Of course, nitrate, now that's the form of nitrogen and magnesium, along with other minerals that will be coming from the soil. And of course, the plant is taking up this mineral by active transport. Now you'll also observe that water, H2O, is coming from the soil, and again that is being moved by osmosis. Now if you look to the upper part of the plant, you'll observe that oxygen is leaving the leaves, and of course carbon dioxide is actually entering. And this is pretty much a process on a day-to-day basis. You'll see the wonderful sun shining over there, and of course the plant is capturing the light energy from the sun, and it is of course using the chlorophyll to capture this light energy. And all this is taking place of course in the chloroplast of the plant. You'll observe that in the atmosphere, water is in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere, and of course oxygen is in the atmosphere. You'd also observe that there are many organisms around the plant, as it is pretty much a feeding relationship where one organism is actually depending on another for something. All right, so the equation there, that's a worded equation for photosynthesis, it nicely summarizes the process of photosynthesis as well, where carbon dioxide is combining with water, and those are the simple inorganic substances, and of course it's using the light energy there to help with the process, and chlorophyll is capturing that light energy to actually produce glucose and of course oxygen. Now, the worded equation can be looked at in different parts. We could actually separate the equation in 3 parts. The raw material, which will have been the carbon dioxide and water that is needed for the process of photosynthesis. Then we could look at the condition. Under what condition will photosynthesis take place? Of course, it's going to need light energy, and it's going to need chlorophyll to collect that light energy. And then the last part of the equation is the product, what is made from the process of photosynthesis. And we already know that glucose and oxygen is made from the process of photosynthesis. You are required to know this equation, and you're also required to know the chemical equation. Now, the chemical equation here has a whole lot of numbers, and in your exam you should not miss any of these numbers. This is what we refer to as a balance equation, and balance in the sense that if you were supposed to count the number of carbon on the raw material side, it would equivalent to the carbon on the product side. Let us try to see if there's any truth to that. So here we have 6 carbon here, and over here we're having 6 carbon. All right, so we could also look at the oxygen. Now this subscript is going to be a multiplier. Those 2 6s 12 plus 6. This 6 applies to this. This 2 applies only to the hydrogen. So we have 2 6s 12. That's 12 oxygen here, and another 6 oxygen here. That makes it 18. Let's come on over here and see if it's equal. So 2 6s 12 plus another 6, that makes it 18. Now we have 12 hydrogen here, and if we were supposed to 2 6s 12, we would have 12 here. So this is a balanced equation, and when you get to the examination, it is very important that you not only write CO2, but instead 6 CO2. So you want to ensure that you remember this chemical equation. For the kids in chemistry, this is a nice place to practice simple balancing of equation, and you could just use a table to do that balancing. So I just showed you a little bit as to how or what makes it a balanced equation. Now there are some plants that are not green because the chlorophyll is masked. So colored plants also carry out photosynthesis, and they are able to do this because they have pigments that we refer to as accessory pigments, and these pigments would be like chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, xanthophyll, and of course carotenoid. So I want you to remember at all time, if it's a plant, it doesn't matter what color plant it is carrying out photosynthesis. Now here we have something, the students who are doing human and social biology, you are not required to know the light dependent and light independent phase, but if you do, it wouldn't hurt you. So we have a simulation, and of course we have done the interpretation for the simulation. So this is a light dependent phase of photosynthesis. What it means is that light is required for this phase to take place. And while we talk about plants, I want us to keep in mind that what we know about plants, that there is a whole lot more to be said about plants. If you want to go a little further, you could read on C3 plant, C4 plant, and of course CAM plant, right? C3 being the most abundant plant, but we really don't want to break away to that for CXC. But if you so feel like you want to know some more about photosynthesis, you want to know some more about plant, you could read about C3 plant, C4 plant, and of course CAM plant. Let's look at the light dependent stage of photosynthesis. Now in the light dependent stage, the light energy captured by the chlorophyll in the chloroplast is used to split water molecule from the soil. Of course the water molecule is coming from the soil into hydrogen and oxygen. Now the oxygen is given off as a product of photosynthesis. Then the oxygen diffuses out through the stomata, and the stomata of course is in the leaf and is used for respiration. You're seeing the cattle there used for respiration and combustion. You're seeing the fire over there, combustion. So it's very important that we have this relationship. Now the hydrogen is retained by the plant and is used in the light independent stage of photosynthesis. What it means is that light is not required for that stage. Now remember, all this is taking place almost pretty much the same time, but we have slowed down that reaction just to show you a little bit as to what's happening. So look at the animation. You'll realize that water is coming from the soil, the water there in black, and the water gets up to the leaf, the area where the whole lot of photosynthesis is taking place, and the light energy from the sun is breaking that water molecule into actually two. And what you find happening is that the hydrogen in the back there is retained by the plant, and the oxygen is being given off. And you're seeing oxygen coming off there from the leaf, going into the atmosphere, and of course it's been used by combustion to ensure that burning takes place. And of course animals like you and I and other organisms, they are using the oxygen of course for respiration. The plant does retain some amount of this oxygen for itself to of course ensure the process of respiration. Now this here is the light independent stage of photosynthesis, and what it is saying is that light is not required. And you would have seen in the animation we have this dotted line somewhat. It's not really blocking the sun, but as a reminder to say light is not required for the light independent stage, right? So in the light independent stage, this is what happens. Carbon dioxide from the air diffuses into the leaf, and of course it's going through the stomata and combined with hydrogen, that hydrogen that was retained by the plant from the light independent stage of photosynthesis, and of course it's forming glucose. All right, remember that this glucose, for some plants they will store the glucose, some plants will convert it to starch and other stuff. All right, so we want to be sure that we remember that. As such, when we're doing all the tests that is required by the syllabus, one of the tests there for photosynthesis, be reminded, is the test for reducing sugar, and glucose is a reducing sugar. For plants like onion and scallion, these plants would be storing this glucose, while other plants would have been storing starch. So we test for starch to see if starch is stored and produced by the plant, and for onion and scallion and probably other crops, you're going to be testing for glucose. Most time we forget that plants actually store some amount of glucose. Most time we forget about onion and scallion, and of course most time we don't even do this test for photosynthesis. But be reminded, there are some plants that store glucose. It is important to note that light is not required for this stage. Let's look at the animation. So here we're seeing somewhat a reverse of what we had before. Now the animal is giving off carbon dioxide from its process of respiration. It goes into the atmosphere and actually is taken up by the plant, of course through that chief photosynthetic organ, the leaf, and there it is combining hydrogen. It combines with the hydrogen. So here we have, let me go through that again. In the light independent stage, what we have is carbon dioxide from the air, and it diffuses into the leaf through the stomata and combined with hydrogen from the light dependent stage of photosynthesis to form glucose. Now it's very important to note that there are some plants that are storing starch and there are some plants that are storing glucose. For example, onion and scallion, these two plants would be storing glucose. There are times when we forget about this and we never really test for glucose. But there are some plants that are storing glucose and we should test. It's one of those tests that is required by CSEC. We should test for both glucose and starch. It's very important to note here that light is not required for this stage, and as such we put the dotted line up where the sun is, just to remind you that the light is not required for the light independent stage. It's very fascinating here and really important to note that the carbon dioxide from respiration in the animal there and the carbon dioxide from combustion, carbon dioxide from the air, it is entering the plant through the stomata, and of course as it gets into the plant, it is combining with the hydrogen. It is combining with the hydrogen that is from the light dependent phase, and it's combining with that hydrogen. The carbon dioxide is combining with the hydrogen to form glucose there in red. The water coming up in the plant, there is just a reminder that to tell you pretty much where this hydrogen is from. Remember, it is in the light independent stage that the water molecule was broken by the sun, and of course oxygen left the plant and the hydrogen was retained for the light independent phase, and here the hydrogen, we're saying, is combining with carbon dioxide to produce glucose. Now, but what happens to all this product that is made by the plant? Such a long process photosynthesis where we already established that oxygen and glucose is produced, and they are pretty much byproducts of photosynthesis. But what really happens to these? What is it that the plant is producing these for? Let us look. Now, some of the oxygen is used by the plant for respiration, and of course the excess diffuses out of a plant into the air. Animals and other organisms use this oxygen for respiration, and it is also used for combustion. And of course combustion is burning, and motor cars will be using that, factories will be using. Once you're lighting a fire, of course it's combustion. Now while some form part of the atmosphere, so there's always oxygen in the atmosphere that we can pull from that oxygen for our purpose of respiration. Let's look at what happens to the glucose. Now the glucose produced is metabolized to produce energy that the plant can use to carry out its life process. Now some of this is also converted to starch and stored in the plant for use during times of scarcity. It is also important to note that some is also stored as carbohydrate, fat, protein, and is stored in various parts of the plant. You can talk about peanut storing pretty much some protein. You could talk about things like banana, breadfruit, and so on. They are storing some amount of starch. And you could talk about like avocado, ackee. These are storing some amount of fat. So there we have the evidence that this is actually true. Now, animals also feed from the food produced by plants, and you should have an appreciation of this as we spoke about the food chain and the food web. So you see here, it's very important for the plants to be producing this energy, for this energy to be transferred from one organism to another. And the plant is pretty magnificent because what it does is to pretty much capture that light energy from the sun and convert it into a form that we can use. Remember the law of thermodynamics, just one law: energy cannot be created or destroyed, but of course it is transformed from one form to another. So the light energy here being transformed to chemical energy. It's time for us to look at the tests, some of the tests, and there's just one test that is missing here, and the test that is missing is for reducing sugar, and we're going to be sending it out as an independent test. Most of these tests we would have already posted, but we wanted to tie it into the lesson to ensure that you remember that these are some of the tests that is required by your syllabus. Remember that the syllabus has 42 experiments that is expected to be carried out or for you to actually know about them, and we would have had some here as simulation virtual labs. So here we are testing for the evolution of oxygen. We said that oxygen is produced during the process of photosynthesis. We're using a water plant, and the water plant here is giving off some amount of oxygen. The oxygen is trapped in those bubbles that's rising, and of course it's able to do this because there's light there provided, and of course you're not seeing the sunlight, but we said that it was light. Why we usually say sunlight? Because it's thought that all energy actually came from the sun. So we have the light energy there causing the plant to give off some amount of oxygen. So that's a setup there: a test tube, a glass funnel, and a beaker with water plant water, and you could just look to see what's happening. Now, to retrieve this oxygen, it's very, very important. The thumb is used to cover the test tube when removing it from this setup, and of course to test the oxygen, we want to ensure that the oxygen is actually trapped in the tube. Observe the setup at your will. Stop, observe, play however many times you so desire. But what happens? How do we prove that there's oxygen? Now, oxygen is a product of photosynthesis we established, but we want to really prove it. A positive test for oxygen is a relighting of a glowing splint, as seen in the animation. Now, it's very important for you to remember that when you light what is called a destroyer to actually guard against mosquito, what you're having there is a glowing destroyer and not a blazing destroyer. So what we'll do is to light the splint, put out that blaze. It would still be glowing, and then we're going to place it over the test tube. Mindful, you don't want to get burned, and then you are going to remove your finger so that it will relight that glowing splint, providing that it is oxygen in the tube. Now here we have it that it was oxygen in the tube because it has relight that glowing splint. Now we want to determine if light is needed for photosynthesis. This is another experiment that is needed for the syllabus. Here we go. And this one is a pretty easy setup. We made this animation very easy. Everything on screen one time. So we want to know if light is needed for photosynthesis. In A, the light energy has been captured by the leaf, and of course this is done by the chlorophyll. And of course what we do is to block a part of the cover part of the leaf. Actually, we're covering a part of the leaf to prevent the sun from hitting that part of the leaf. Then we're going to detach the leaf, and we're going to place it in, of course, boiling water, and this of course stops the reaction and start to break the cells, those heavy cells on the leaf, so that the process is easy for testing. And then we're going to remove it from that boiling water. We're going to place it in ethanol. Having placed in ethanol, we're going to place this ethanol in a hot water bath. Ensure that the flame is off or you will ignite the ethanol and you might be burned. So you don't want that to happen. Ensure that you turn off a flame, place the leaf in the alcohol or the ethanol, and you're going to place this boiling tube in a hot water bath. Ensure that you turn it away from your person so as to prevent any form of injury. When we would have removed the leaf from the ethanol in E, the leaf appeared to be really crispy and dry, and what we did to hydrate it, we placed it in some water and then we placed it on a white tile. Then we applied some amount of iodine to test for the presence of starch. Now you're seeing there, as soon as the iodine would have hit the leaf, the area that was covered, it took the color of the iodine, that red-brown color, while the other parts of the leaf took on the blue-black color, as is expected for the presence of starch. So the area that was covered, there is no starch present there, suggesting that light is needed for photosynthesis. However, the other part that was exposed to light, that area carried out the process of photosynthesis. It's a very wonderful and nice animation, a lab that you could write up. And remember, this is coming to you from CSEC Biology, the cover page, and of course, I am Mr. Wilson. We're going to determine if chlorophyll is needed for photosynthesis. Of course, chlorophyll, what we do is to find a variegated leaf. A variegated leaf is usually a green leaf with a lighter color. In most cases, it would be white. And then we're going to carry out pretty much the same step as we carried out earlier. The difference here is that this leaf is actually white and green, and the white area of this leaf would be lacking a chlorophyll. So having carried out the entire process as is listed on the screen, when we get to section F of this experiment, we would have applied iodine again. What we realize is that the area that was white took the color of the iodine, that's a red-brown color, while the other part of the leaf turned blue-black. This is enough evidence to say that the white area that contains no chlorophyll had no starch. Hence, it's evident that chlorophyll is needed for the process of photosynthesis. It was wonderful having this lesson. Please be reminded to like, share, subscribe, and when you do, remember to hit that notification bell. Now there's an ads on screen. You probably want to check it out. We have classes on a Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday, and it is online on YouTube, 5 p.m. You could read the poster here. Ensure that you subscribe, and watch the videos to the end.